had multiple teams that I was leading. That wasn't a job I was excelling at. It wasn't a job I had much experience with, and the right thing to do for the company would be to give the team to someone else, hire someone else in and like transition all of those people over. And initially I was like, back up. This is my team. I am growth. I know what is going on here. Like, who on the planet could possibly understand growth as well as I do here?
That's Gaurav Vohra. He was part of the founding team at Superhuman, where he led growth, product, marketing, and analytics teams at various points during his 10 years of working there. Today, Gaurav advises other founders on how to grow faster in the PLG space. If you are new here, my name is Andrew Kaplan, and this is a show where I get to have candid conversations about some of the toughest moments in my guest careers. And today you're going to hear about a few of those from Gaurav. Getting passed over for a promotion, how he battled through imposter syndrome, and the background to making the difficult decision to step down from growth at Superhuman after it outgrew his core skill set. Let's go ahead and jump right in.
First, I'll introduce myself. My name is Gaurav. UK born and raised, as you could probably tell from my accent. I was born in Manchester, which you probably can't tell from my accent. People from Manchester usually have a bit of a northern accent. I have a little bit of that remaining in some words, but it's sort of watered down over the years. And then I mostly grew up in Birmingham in the UK. Now, people who are familiar with the UK, they might know about Birmingham, but people who are not familiar with the UK, I like to say Birmingham has big Sacramento energy. It's kind of like middle of the country.
Because I'm from the East Coast. I was like, what does Sacramento energy mean?
I think anyone in California knows what big Sacramento energy is. It's just like, yeah, I mean, I know the name, you know, it's like, it's capital California. It's like, okay, but it's not LA, it's not San Francisco. That's where all the good stuff happens. There wasn't anything exciting happening. There wasn't anything like big happening in Birmingham, but it was a great place to grow up. I had a fun childhood and I looked fondly on everything that happened. I think it was like a nice place it was like a small pond kind of a situation to grow up in. I wasn't like a tiny kid in like London. It's just like a huge city. And it allowed for this like curiosity and excitement to sort of move into other cities and places like London and San Francisco, where I live now.
And so what's it like growing up there? Like, what kind of stuff are you into? Are you playing sports? Are you into computer games? Are you riding your bikes around the neighborhood? Help us to understand a little bit more what life might have been like.
So I am a younger sibling, and my brother is a fair bit older. He's 7 years older. One of the key attributes of growing up is that I managed to import a lot of his hobbies and interests into my own childhood. But you got to imagine what that's like with a 7-year gap. I mean, when you're like a 2-year-old and you have a 4-year-old sibling, you might get some slightly more advanced toys in your life. When you're like a 2-year-old and you have like a 9-year-old sibling, those slightly more advanced toys are like Super Nintendo. If you're sitting down as like a toddler playing Mortal Kombat, video games that you probably shouldn't be playing, right? So like technology was a big theme. I was 5, my brother was 12. He was like programming on old school computers, and I was getting exposed to all those kinds of ideas, video games, LAN parties, like the kinds of things that he was up to, early Napster, and then using software in lots of fun and exciting different ways to explore music and science and arts, right? These were all things that I got exposed to really early. So I'd say a really big theme of mine, my childhood growing up, was exposure to technology way ahead of my peers, because I had an especially nerdy brother who was like bringing that into my life just by being. We grew up in like the countryside, more so than in the city of Birmingham. In our backyard, there was like a literal paddock full of sheep. So I would wake up and it was very quiet. And if you just listen, you could hear the bleating of new lambs right in the middle of spring. Very pretty, very serene. Then you'd open the window and you could like smell like sheep dung, which is like a nice earthy smell that you get used to after a while. And then, you know, it was really nice. It was just like big, open, green sort of paddocky spaces. I didn't spend a tremendous amount of time outside because it's cold and rainy a lot where I'm from, but it was nice to have that kind of environment and that sort of situation outside. And so the time that we did spend outside was very pretty, very beautiful. And I had a bunch of really great friends in the neighborhood who all went to my same school as me, for example. For me, like one of the biggest hobbies and passions was mostly like music, actually, not being outside of sports. I did a ton of music growing up. And that was really my outlet outside of academics to do fun and creative and interesting things. So those were like some of the flavors of my childhood growing up.
So if we had met, or if we could meet one of your friends at that time, How would they have described you? You described yourself as a little bit of a nerd, as someone who's into music. How would they have described you?
I was thinking a little bit about this in some of the pre-conversation prep, casting my mind back that far. When I was at 11, like really at the start of that journey, I would say I was pretty dorky, like just pretty much a geek. You probably can't see on the video, but like right now I'm pretty tall, like I'm 6'2", and relatively thin, right? So like stature wise, like there are some good things about what happened, I guess, when I grew up. When I was 11, I was kind of short and like a little bit just, I don't want to say chubby, but like I wasn't in shape. Like I couldn't run a mile, you know what I mean? So I was like this kind of unhealthy-ish geek that struggled to kind of like run a mile without collapsing. So like over the course of secondary school, I think I gained sort of this confidence in who I was. And what my friends might say when I was 18 was like, he's a confident geek. So like the geek part didn't change, but like maybe he's gained a little bit of personality around himself or something. Weirdly enough, I think the biggest factor was getting contact lenses. I'm like incredibly short-sighted. My glasses are milk bottle thick, right? Like -7 on both eyes, if that means anything to anybody. I can't see more than 2 inches in front of my eyes without it starting to become blurry. And I've had glasses since I was 5. So I always had glasses growing up. Like it's always like a hallmark of a slightly bullied dork that you have glasses, and like you can't play sports. Like the soccer ball will hit you in the face and your like glasses will be shattered. You'll be like, your week will be toast, right? And then I think it was like I was 13 or 14. I finally got like my first pair of contact lenses. And it was like this glow up moment, like, wow, I can see in all the angles and directions. And so that really helped me, I don't know, come out of my shell a bit up until 18. And then I went to university and I realized that contact lenses made me tired and made me unable to study harder, and that I didn't need any of that anymore. So I went straight back to glasses and re-embraced my dorkiness.
I was going to say it, and then it went the other way. And you realized it made you too tired to study, so you just stopped studying and started partying. I thought it could have gone that direction too.
I became a party animal. No, I only wear contact lenses now when I'm skiing or like doing something, some water, or swimming or scuba diving, something like that. That's like, it'll be 5 days a year now where I put my contact lenses in.
And so what did you study in university?
I read economics, which was sort of a safe choice. A little bit of the sciencey math side of things, a little bit of the essay writing, subjective, qualitative stuff, really keeping all options open, not closing anything down too hard. If I could go back and redo, I'd probably do computer science, just like more practical and hands-on. And
I say the same thing. Yeah, 100%. Made way more money, way faster.
Yeah, exactly. That's basically it. Let's just cut to the chase.
Well, I don't know about you. When I was in college, but when I was in school, my parents were like, oh, I don't think those are good jobs. They're all getting outsourced. Those are not going to be jobs that are going to be available to you. I think you should go in a different direction. Not that I was pulled in that direction anyways, but it's crazy how wrong they were.
I know. Yeah. My parents weren't a massive input to the decision of what I studied, to be fair, in my case. It was more that a very typical thing to do was read economics at university and then do investment banking or management consulting. Like those were 2 career paths that were like good and well paid, and like even at 17, 18 you could like see the path and be like, okay, cool, there is a decently salaried job and like career progression at the other end of this. Medicine, on the other hand, 6 years of studying, not super well paid in the UK. Law, it's its own beast. You're thinking about like your traditional sort of professions, and like tech and entrepreneurship and software, like these things were just coming around the corner as like legitimate industries around that time. Had I been 2-3 years later, I think it would have been even more obvious to study something like computer science. It's maybe a bit of a miss because, as I said, 7-year older brother, he did computer science. He was way ahead of the curve. But I picked up most all of what I needed to know around computers and programming, both before, during, and after my university time anyway. So here we are.
And so tell us about your first couple of steps into this world of SaaS, PLG. I know you've gone in and out of marketing a few times. What's your first step in this direction?
Yeah, it was actually when I was at university, I did a freshman internship at a really cool tech company in the UK called Redgate Software. The company was widely regarded in the UK tech scene as just like one of the best tech companies at the time in England. Kept getting these top place to work awards from various publications and doing really cool stuff, really great office culture and team, and doing well like as a business. And what they did was they made essentially productivity software and great applications for database engineers and developers. So back in 2008 or 9, if you were like a DBA back then, like data engineers and analytics engineers didn't exist as a job. But if you were a DBA or a database admin or systems engineer, you'd use Redgate software to do your work more productively. And it was things like write your SQL 10 times faster. You've got two databases that are clones of each other and you need to compare them across each other. So this software like makes it a trivial task. It was really cool stuff. It exposed me to a lot of ideas around technology that are still relevant even like to this very day. Basically, understanding how data works and how data is stored is just such a crucial backbone bit of information for someone in growth, which I am in. And so I'm really, really grateful that I had that opportunity. Also, the role that I did was kind of this hybrid product manager, RevOpsy sort of role. Like it was internal facing that I was like helping the sales team make more money. So you could consider it as RevOps, but it was product managery in that I was building the software that the salespeople use internally to do their job more effectively. So it was really cool. It exposed me to a whole bunch of those kind of soft skills around PMing and commercial RevOps type stuff, while also being in this environment where I was learning SQL. I was learning about the power and value of databases in the world out there. And all of Redgate's customers are all like companies that have interesting and useful applications of data, right? That was like my first step. And I was like, that's amazing. I love this tech company. What a great world. But coming out of that, I was like, I don't understand the first thing about the business side of this, right? Like, how does this thing make money? And so kind of harkening back to what I mentioned earlier, I did eventually end up doing management consulting. I went down that more traditional path of, okay, let's learn about the business world through consulting, because that way there's like a surefire job, like I can move to London, all the smart people are doing this. And so I got a job with a company called Oliver Wyman Management Consulting. But the fun thing is, so I got my next internship through Oliver Wyman, but because I knew SQL from that first internship, immediately I was staffed on a project where they were like, can you just write SQL for like 7 hours a day, please? And maybe in the remaining 1 or 2 hours, you'll come into the client meeting and talk about the strategy. But really, we just want you to write SQL. And I was like, all right, sounds fun. So I just managed to sharpen my technical skills dramatically by having an insane amount of time to get really, really good at this thing, to the point where I was like the guy, like the data engineer guy who could turn any mess of a data situation at any client into like a clean system. This isn't really like building towards SaaS necessarily, but it's building towards tech.
Yeah, and definitely building towards growth, right? It's like you got the PM skills, RevOps, which is kind of an adjacent thing. The way the data works, obviously super valuable. So you're just stacking these skills on top of each other, which is super cool.
Yeah. Which I didn't really realize was happening at the time until maybe like 3-4 years into the consulting. I did that for 5 years, and 3 or 4 years in, I was like, wait, I've gotten really good at data engineering. I've gotten really good at building software and kind of PM type skills, really good at the commercial skills. That's what consultants do, is right, generally help their clients with commercial problems. I found myself into a small sub-team within consulting that was focused on delivery of software, not just strategy. Like we would deliver the strategy and then build the software so that the client could keep making the right decisions, choices, and actions, as opposed to just like having a PowerPoint slide that they would look at once in a while. They actually had like a tangible piece of software that they could use. And so we would build the software, and I would, and others like me would be responsible for like sitting down and coding that thing. And if not coding it, like we would be the PMs who would work with engineers who would actually build it. And then we would be on the back end, like doing all of the data algorithm stuff. And so I was like, wait, hang on. I'm picking up PM skills here, software skills. I love this stuff. I should consider just being in tech. Right? Like, why am I doing tech in a consulting capacity or in a management consulting capacity? I should just like be at a tech company. Around the same time, my brother, it's a frequent character in this story, had exited his first company, Reportive, to LinkedIn. I think it was like around 2011. And so I saw what was possible in the world of tech, right? It's something that's completely impossible and alien when you're a consultant. You don't see that kind of steep trajectory change in the course of 2 years. But he took his company through YC, sold to LinkedIn, had a great kind of outcome for him and the team. And the product Reportive was really well known and loved and still is with people who were around back then.
I think I was a user. I think at HubSpot, we were customers, or maybe we were encouraged to use it. Yeah, I remember Reportive.
Yeah. And it was just so cool. Like it was this revolutionary way of changing how you thought about email, right? Email was just this plain text, boring environment, and Rapportive made it like personal, and you could build rapport with the people you email. So I saw that and I was like, okay, I'm learning these technical skills. I know what tech looks like or what's possible. I can see it pretty much firsthand. I should be in that world. So around 4 years in to consulting, I persuaded the company to move me and my then girlfriend, now wife, who also worked at the consulting company, from London to San Francisco. We had a San Francisco office, and they agreed. They were like, okay, cool, we'll move you. If it sounds like you're either going to get there on your own two backs, or we can help you and maybe you'll work for us for a couple of years more. So they kind of sponsored our visas, got us out here, and then, hey presto, we're here. It's 2015. We're like at the epicenter of tech, and that's like the first real page in the chapter of being properly in tech.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I want to double click on some of these moments. And so I've never worked in management consulting, but my impression is from the outside looking in, it's a hard place to work, that the hours are long, that it's cutthroat, that probably there are moments that don't feel good. One, is that true? And two, if it is true, could you share one of the moments that's been there that was challenging in your management consulting or in the management consulting portion of your journey?
Yeah, it is mostly true. There are pockets where it's a lot more friendly and tolerable and approachable. I'll say like different companies, different firms have different styles. There are entire management consulting companies that just thrive off like a negative energy, people working 18-hour days.
Yeah, I have a few friends that have worked at those. Yeah,
same. Oliver Wyman was not like that, and certainly not the bit of Oliver Wyman I was in, which was, at the time, it was split into financial services and everything else. Everything else included retail, healthcare, manufacturing, transport, etc. And I was in that section. It was a bunch of just like fun-loving individuals who all thought the same and like wanted to have fun, right? We worked hard, but we also enjoyed it while we did. And I wouldn't say we were working crazy long. Like a typical day might be like, you're in the client's offices from 8 till 5, then you go, you're traveling for work, right? So you go back to the hotel, you go and do something fun for 3-4 hours. You have like a case team dinner, and then maybe you've got like a little bit of work to polish up afterwards, like maybe an hour or two. It's not like nuts. It's not like you're slaving away until 2 a.m. and then falling asleep and then waking up at 6 to carry on. Like, it was hard, but it wasn't soul destroying. I didn't find it soul destroying. And it was fun when you're in your early 20s and that's kind of your life. And like the people who you work with are all like-minded and similarly like interesting and passionate people. The hard parts, some of the hard parts, the very first thing is this personality type that everyone joins consulting with, which is this like anxious overachiever moniker. And I was in that group, right? Like everyone goes into consulting being like the smartest kid in the class from wherever they came from. And then they're pitted against like 10 other smartest kids in the class. And it's a very intense performance culture where you're being evaluated every 6 months professionally. You're getting like the opportunity to promote every 6 months. And you're also getting these project reviews every 6 weeks practically. Like your case manager is literally sitting you down and giving you like really in-depth feedback every 6 weeks, which is way more than in most jobs or industries I've ever seen.
Especially early in your career. I feel like for most of us early in our career, we get no feedback.
Yeah, little to no feedback. And maybe every 6 to 12 months, there's that like performance evaluation, but it'll be like a couple paragraphs. This was like many paragraphs every 6 weeks. And so like you get used to that, like you get into it. I don't know. For me, one of the biggest sort of like moments of just like whiplash was like this feeling that I was doing really well and I was on track to like promote, and like promotions were like widely celebrated and regarded as like the thing you were supposed to accomplish. And then a year in, it was like, hey, sorry, Buster, you're staying exactly where you are and all your peers are getting promoted to the next level.
All of them?
Yeah, it's how it felt, yeah. Enough to feel like it was just like a massive slap around the face. I was like, what did I do? Am I a failure? Obviously, I wasn't a failure. I was working a good job and I was like doing pretty well. And there's another chance like 6 months from now. Like, it's funny how perspective is completely lacking when you're in the middle of something. But it felt really sucky at the time. You know, the feedback was around like being, for me personally, it was around being like really good at the quant skills, like the hard skills, the SQL, the programming, like the building of software, etc. Not to put too fine a point on it, but just being a little bit of a asshole in some situations. Like I needed to kind of like turn it down a little bit in some soft skill situations and like learn to seek to understand before being understood.
Where does that come from? Because all the things that you shared with me earlier, into video games, the adorable nerd, these are my words, not yours. But then there's this different part of you that came out in this part of your story. Was it always there in the other parts of your journey as well, or did something change?
You get rewarded early in consulting. You also get rewarded in like university, at least in my university experience, for being right, for being brilliant, for being smart, for being correct. And that reward circuit was always like, the more right you are, the better you are. And so in these situations where you could be in an ambiguous scenario, maybe there's a partner in the room and there's a client in the room, or, it's a team setting and like, no one knows what the correct answer actually is. There may not even be a correct answer. What matters is how people feel. It can be like, this friction of all I know is how to aim to be right. I'm going to be very forthright. I'm going to be very precocious and put my point of view out there. And if someone disagrees, like they can disagree. That's great. But there are scenarios where that just doesn't fly super well. And I think that's part of why I found it so tough. It's like, clearly I wasn't trying to be, difficult to work with or frustrating or anything. It was more just like this side product of something that was arguably a strength of mine, which was like critical thinking. And I had to sort of like take many steps back and be like, wow, I have to modulate that. And I will say that wasn't the first time that was something that was a challenge like in my career. I think there have been many, many scenarios where I've had like different versions of that same thing come around. Each time in the moment it felt very challenging, but each time after the fact it generated growth for me by being a learning moment.
And so how does this change how you move, how you operate afterwards? Because you have this situation, your peers and probably your friends are getting promoted, you're watching them, you're probably a little bit bitter. You've got to change some part of you that's also sort of your superpower, and now it's kind of your kryptonite, which is always how it goes. What happens after this?
Yeah, I think soft skills, personality traits, things in that category take years to evolve. Like they don't change overnight. You don't pick up a skill and then deploy it the next week. So for me, it truly took years to see that side of myself kind of iterate and change. I would say I'm still in the process of developing that side of myself, but maybe the next 5 or 10 years of my career were progressive evolutions and iterations of that side of things. In the very short term, obviously, I was very salty. And it was a fairly large part of why I transitioned into that, what I mentioned, that tech team. I was like, well, if that's how it's going to be in the consulting side of things, maybe I can go work with this technical team where like being correct is actually valued because you're building software and the software has to work. I found myself a slightly more accepting home in that tech group. But at the same time, what was interesting was the personalities in that tech group opened my eyes to how you don't have to just conform to this like mold, this expectation of what it means to be this super empathetic and like well-rounded consultant who's also like really smart and brilliant. There were different characters in that tech group, the really brilliant systems engineers, the great designer folks, the folks who are like very entrepreneurial. And so I was like, okay, cool. This is like a little bit more like a software company. There's different roles, different people. Not everyone is like this cookie cutter clone. And you can kind of figure out who you are and then develop that into who you want to be in the context of this team. So that to me was like the immediate next step, but appreciating that the feedback was valuable. And it is something that I think was helpful over the next 5-10 years.
Yeah. What's interesting is when you get feedback on the tactical skills, it's not easy, but it's somewhat straightforward, right? Oh, you need to learn this new thing if you want to get to the next level. Here's steps that you can do to learn it. Did you learn it? And it's very binary. Yes, I've learned it to some degree, yes or no. But on a soft skill, there's so much left to interpretation and perspective. So for folks who are listening to this, what's a way that they can understand if they're making progress on a soft skill, if they get feedback that's similar?
I think the main thing is asking people what they think, like asking the people who you work with for that sort of raw, unvarnished thoughts, which I've only really realized in the last couple of years, like you can only do if you get to this point of camaraderie and closeness with the people you work with, that like you can ask them anything. But let's say you're at step 1, get to that level of closeness and camaraderie with the people you closely work with. Can you literally share a joke or crack jokes over anything? Are you like SMS texting levels with like your 5 closest coworkers? For me, this really only clicked in the last couple of years where I feel like I am that SMS level. Like I don't see these people as like my colleagues or coworkers to keep at arm's length. I can truly, have a deep and meaningful conversation if that's what we need to do. So that's step 1. Step 2 is then you can ask those questions. You can be like, hey, I felt really angry in that meeting about what was happening. were you able to tell that I was fuming under the surface? And then they'll be like, yeah, you seem pretty mad. Or like, no, you hit it very well, actually. I found that to be the most helpful feedback system because it's so hard to self-evaluate. Some people I know do self-evaluate through reviewing their own call recordings. Like if you have...
Oh, call recordings. Yeah.
Yeah, so you have like a Gong or an AI bot join your call and it's like a tense conversation, a heated discussion. Like you can literally go back and watch the recording and be like, wow, that's where I really lost my temper and said something that was a little bit short or snappy. I know some people who do that. And like, I think that's also really powerful as well. So that's another technique if you're super like growth minded and want to like grow even faster than waiting for someone to share their thoughts.
I find anytime I wish I had the recording, I didn't record. And I record a bunch of stuff that I didn't need to replay back. And that's just me personally. This episode of the show is presented by Churnkey. I spent years of my career focused on acquisition, activation, and converting free users into paid subscribers. But if I could go back in time, I wish that my teams had prioritized churn more. Don't get me wrong, we did the bare minimum, which was trying to reduce failed payments. But working in a high-volume, product-led subscription business, I think we missed a massive opportunity to have more impact and drive more revenue that I personally regret. Because even a relatively low monthly churn of 5% means that you lose nearly half of your customers on an annual basis. This is why I am so excited to be partnering with Churnkey to help more SaaS companies like yours tackle churn. Churnkey has a free metrics product that integrates with all the major billing providers and helps you to visualize all those important churn metrics in one dashboard. Things like retention cohorts, cake charts, the breakdown of voluntary versus involuntary churn, gross versus net, revenue versus logo churn, and a whole bunch more. And with Churnkey, you can also take action to reduce churn. Their platform enables you to create and launch personalized cancellation flows, failed payment recovery campaigns, reactivation programs, customer health modeling, and they've got AI built in to help you understand the specific trends in your data. Their platform helps SaaS companies like yours save 20 to 40% of subscription revenue that would otherwise be lost to churn and is pretty compelling. Their product is something I constantly recommend to my coaching and advising clients. You can see for yourself at churnkey.co. Hey, real quick, before we hear back from Gaurav, I wanted to take a second to ask you to please like and subscribe on whatever platform I hope that you're enjoying this conversation on. The algorithms seem to really like it. And as your host, I would really appreciate it too. Okay, back to the convo. So you started to share a little bit about feedback. I'm curious to expand on this because I love asking guests about some of the toughest feedback that they've received in their career. What comes to mind for you as I mentioned that?
Like tough feedback that I received over the course of my career?
Yeah, I mean, because there are sometimes when you get tough feedback and it's in a formal setting, sometimes it's less formal, but it's just as impactful. But I feel like in my own career and in the careers of folks who I coach and I mentor, there's usually a small number of moments that stand out to them. So I was curious if you'd be comfortable sharing one of yours.
So I'll set the context. So after consulting, I moved to San Francisco. I was sitting down with my brother and he was just in the process of starting Superhuman. So listeners might know that he's the CEO at Superhuman, actually. And this is like early 2015. He's showing me the pitch deck, the slides that he was kind of sharing with pre-seed investors. And he was like, this is Superhuman. It's reportive, but it's 10 times better. It has all the reportive features, but it also has send later and remind me and all these great kind of features that just, wow, amazing. What a cool product that the world needs to have. And here I was deliberately wanting to move more into tech and be more, I guess, like working on something more directly used by end users, right? Not in a strictly B2B consulting sense. This sounds amazing. This is what I want to be doing. And so, carrying on the conversation, at a certain point, he's like, I'd like you to join the founding team, right? Like we're building this crack team. He didn't use the word crack. Getting Conrad Conrad was one of the engineers from Reportive. He'll be our CTO. I'd like you to focus on growth, product and growth. He was, Rahul's like very product visionary. We got Vivek in the company. He's incredibly well connected around Silicon Valley and knows everybody and did all of the sort of like difficult ops things, right? Like setting up finance and legal and offices and all that, all that stuff. Okay, that sounds amazing. Yeah, let's get going. So we got going. We started Superhuman. Superhuman is still going. Hopefully listeners here know about the company. If not, we build the fastest email experience ever made. If you spend 3 hours a day in email, just imagine what you could be doing with that time instead. We cut that in half so that you can use that freed up time for anything you want. It could be other work. It could be time with your kids. There's a lot of ways we do that. Nowadays, a big chunk of it is obviously AI, and also we're the best email product for your whole team. Like you and your teammates can use email together in a very collaborative, dynamic way that's just unlike anything you've ever experienced before with email. So Superhuman has been the journey of the last 10 years, and I'm part of the founding team, and I've had the opportunity to basically do every role in the company and then build the team around those functions and then lead those teams. So being the growth person, I did all of the go-to-market roles myself. I onboarded customers. I did customer support. I was literally the Swiss Army knife of customer-facing work, including like the more internal-facing product management side of things, bringing back the feedback, helping with bug triage, feature prioritization, blah, blah, blah. And so I did that. I was like working my butt off for like years and years and years. The company's like picking up traction. We're growing revenue. I need to start building my team out. So I start building the onboarding team. I start building the customer delight team. It's our version of support. I'm building the marketing team. So I'm doing the job and then I'm building the team. Got to a point where I had multiple teams that I was leading. I think at peak, one of the peaks was like 35 people in what was collectively known as growth. But it was really like a bunch of different go-to-market teams with like managers and ICs doing the work. And I think coming full circle to your question, like the really tough feedback that I got indirectly/directly was at a certain point, like I am no longer good at that job of leading that large number of individuals. I was really good at doing the work. I was really good at scaling the team and bringing great people in to do the work. But now that it was like this large number of people and the job has evolved into this leader of leaders, large team manager, so to speak, who needs to be thinking mostly strategically, maybe 40% strategically and 60% dealing with like people issues, bringing in really strong managers to lead the ICs, all that kind of stuff. That wasn't a job I was excelling at. It wasn't a job I had much experience with, and the right thing to do for the company would be to give the team to someone else, hire someone else in and like transition all of those people over. And initially I was like, back up. This is my team. I am growth. I know what is going on here. Like who on the planet could possibly understand growth as well as I do here and what all these people do and what's important. Very much just like a digging heels in moment.
Of course,
like,
yeah.
no,
How could you not? Of course, yeah. Fuck you guys. This is my fucking team.
Here's my entire identity. Now, here's the funny thing. I mean, eventually had a couple of those conversations. It was like, yeah, running this onboarding team is actually pretty tough. All I'm doing is just like hiring and firing.
Right. It's not the tactical work anymore. You're right.
Yeah. And it was neither like customer facing, it wasn't strategic. It was like a lot of just like people stuff. It's like, okay, I can see the idea of transitioning all of that to someone else and like making, yeah, it's their problem now. But okay, cool. Let's try it. Let's do it. And fortunately for me, that was around the time I also had my first kid on the way. And so I had this kind of thing in the calendar where I was like, yeah, I'm going to be pretty busy. You know, I'm going on parental leave. I don't want to have a team of 35. I'm going to have like, you know, my hands full with a new baby. Let's give it a shot. So we actually split growth up into marketing and customer. So it was like, it wasn't growth products or anything at that time. It was like 7-person marketing team, like a 25-person customer team. We carved it out. Head of marketing comes in, we hire. Head of customer comes in, give those people up. I go from like tons of, you know, the biggest team in the company to like no direct reports.
And so what was your role then? Did your title change?
It did, yeah. It went from head of growth. It was like briefly head of strategy and biz ops, which is like a weird, just like non-title. Like, what is strategy?
I was going to say,
ops?
yeah, it's sort of like a placeholder until we figure out what to do. Yeah.
Yeah, it was truly a placeholder. I'm like, okay, so head of strategy and biz ops. Okay, interesting. What do you actually do? Anyway, I was on parental leave and I come back. I think I retained like one of my direct reports, the early growth team people who didn't really make sense in marketing nor in the customer team. And it was like, okay, this is like our proto growth PM, right? Let's start thinking about all the stuff that drives growth that's not marketing and that's not the customer facing functions, but is growth products. It's like analytics, it's building systems and operations and tools around our processes. I still had like this really tiny corner of responsibility in the business. Very quickly, it was obvious that what the company needed next was, well, actually, before I get to what we need next, I will share that coming back and not having any of those responsibilities is the best thing ever. I was like, this is awesome. I don't have to worry about any of these people issues. Those hiring targets are no longer mine to stress about. I don't have to think about that acquisition number every week. Like I can just do what I do best, which is like think about the highest leverage problem to solve and then go and solve it. Usually, hitting a predefined number week over week, it's critical and it has to happen, but it's not necessarily the highest leverage thing. It's like it has to happen. And I found myself like freed up from a lot of these has to happen type responsibilities, able to think more about what was going to maybe trajectory change things.
Yeah, it's so cool. And it's really interesting. Your story, we were talking about this before we started recording, similar to my own personal journey, where I got to a certain place in my career that I had all these goals around, and I didn't really like the job because it was less about doing the tactical work that I was so passionate about. And it was more about advocating for resources and hiring and collaborating with other members of the executive. And I didn't really like that. I wasn't good at it. And I was sort of lost when I got there. And so your journey there was different. And the reasons why things changed, obviously, were different than my situation. But I'm curious, in your circle of tech friends, is this common? Is it common to hire someone who's really great for one stage and then needing to make a change for someone at a different stage?
I think it's incredibly common. Yeah. I think there's a very rare type of individual who likes that sort of early work and the scaling, and who also likes the sort of leading and the constant advocating for resources and socializing of strategy and that sort of thing. That person who can do both very well is extremely rare. And not just do it well, but also who enjoys doing both of those things. I know people who are incredibly good at the first thing. I know people who are incredibly good at the second thing and enjoy it, but very, very, very few relatively who like both. And so what I've mostly seen with, especially my friends who are in similar career stages, is this like, I don't know, ego death around being the startup exec, right? It's like a lot of them have been startup execs or tech company execs, and they're like, that was fun for a bit, but I don't want to do it again, right? Like they find like a more intrinsically rewarding thing that they do, and that can be in the context of a company, or it can be working for themselves or some other endeavor, but it's sort of like this realization that you can it's okay to step off the escalator for a bit. It's okay to step off the escalator maybe forever and do something that's a little bit more up your street. So yeah, I see that a lot.
And what's your advice to someone who's just before that step? Maybe they've made it to some level of the leadership team. They're no longer enjoying it, but they're scared to step off the escalator because of the optics. They're scared because of the way it looks on their resume. They can't go back in time because how could they do that? It'll look like a demotion. And what's your advice to someone in that situation?
I think there is a lot of value in doing the hard thing for at least some amount of time. My suggestion would be try it for a bit, see if it is something that you actually enjoy. Some people surprise themselves and realize that they're actually really good at it in a way they didn't expect. So at least give it a go. Let's say for 6 to 12 months. 6 to 12 months is like a pretty decently long amount of time that like it doesn't optically look that bad on your resume if you did it for a year and then switched into something else. And then after that amount of time, once you've given it a fair shake, I think it's totally cool and admirable to have another transition, to change role or focus and do something else. It could be in the context of the current company or at a different company. Some of the people I admire and respect the most who I've worked with have made exactly that shift. They've done things like selflessly announce to the exec team, hey, I am not the person who is going to take us to the next level doing the jobs that I own today. I'm going to literally step back from that role and make space for us to bring someone in who is going to be better at this role than I am. And I look forward to maybe working with that person, maybe reporting to them and learning from them. I've seen that happen. It's awesome. And it's so everyone is like almost moved to tears at like how avant-garde and like kind of self-aware someone can be in that moment to do that. Yeah, not everyone can do that. A lot of people like buckle up and kind of grit their teeth and push on through. But if you can build that courage to take that step, I think the rewards are really great in terms of your personal happiness.
It's a courageous thing to do. Something I've often thought about is if you're at a company that outgrows you, it's the best case scenario, assuming that you have some options, right? Because that means you're at a really high growth company, and those are rare and those are hard to find. What's more common is you have someone who's feeling stuck and that the company isn't growing quick enough and there aren't growth opportunities for them and they're bored and then they need to leave to go look for that next thing. So I actually think it's the best outcome, even though it's not easy.
There's always that side of it where it's like the fact that I am not the right person to lead this 30, 50 person org. How great that there are 30 or 50 people who do this thing, and there's someone else in the world who can do this leadership role or can take that job on. And here's another thing. If you do happen to take the path where you step back and actually elect to work for that person who is brought in, and then they come in and they they rock, right? Like there's someone who are really good at their job. You work with them. The things that you'll learn from them are just like mind blowing. I had this great experience. So like after the head of growth piece, basically the long story short, the next couple of years was essentially a similar vibe. I ran the marketing team again for a bit. I ran the whole product and design team for a bit. I started the analytics team and grew and scaled that to 5-ish people or so, and then migrated back over to growth product. Had an opportunity to do more of the technical side of growth again. And that was all great. But a similar kind of pattern emerged where I'm not the right person to be leading these things at mega scale. And also the company needed more of like a COO/president role. And we brought someone in, his name is Paul, lead the company in that way. But in doing so, that meant that like I and the entire rest of the executive team were all going to get leveled. Like we all reported to Rahul as the CEO, and now all of a sudden we were going to report to this new guy. And for all of us, I was like, what is this? But here's the thing, like working with Paul was incredible. I learned so many great things from him as a person, seeing how he operates. He brings a completely different style and approach to Rahul. And so if you kind of like swallow that initial bitter pill of like, I'm a new manager, I'm getting leveled, whatever. If that person is truly awesome, and it is a big if, sometimes they're not. Sometimes you get someone brought in above you who you don't respect, and like maybe that's time to move on. But if they're awesome, then that can just be like, in a way, like the biggest accelerant for your growth, because you're now learning from someone who is probably more similar to who you want to be 5-10 years from now, potentially. And you get to see it firsthand, right? Like you get to learn from them on the job. And that's really cool.
Yeah. You get to see it from the inside, what it looks like, how they make decisions, all that good stuff. I want to double click on something you said a second ago. Got me thinking a little bit. So you had the opportunity, you said, I scaled marketing, I scaled CS, I had the opportunity to scale business intelligence. Might have been one or two other teams that I skipped over in there. But I'm curious, getting to do so many things that are outside of your core lane. Do you ever feel imposter syndrome, or do you ever feel anxious, or do you ever feel like, geez, who am I to be doing all these things? Or does that never pop up for you?
No, it absolutely popped up. I think the two places where it popped up the most were the bits of marketing that I just truly did not understand. There are lots of bits of marketing that I understand incredibly well because they overlap. So my core lane, I'll define that first. I would say growth. And growth is a pretty broad lane that has like data, products, marketing, like it's got like elements of a bunch of stuff, but let's say the fusion of all of those elements to drive growth outcomes. Okay. And so there's bits of marketing in there that I understand very well. Like I understand our marketing channels that lead to growth. Okay, great. But there are bits of marketing that I just had no idea about performance marketing, paid acquisition, right? And like in theory, that's the way to drive growth, but I just didn't know the first thing about it. Similarly, big, hairy sort of brand overhauls and like product marketing changes that might involve like redoing the entire website. I don't know anything about that. I knew a lot about the existing brand and existing product marketing, and like those were all product marketing emails and lifecycle messages and whatever that I built. But like turning the page into a new chapter, like that's something that needs like a experienced head of marketing to do. So there were, I felt huge imposter syndrome there. And similarly, leading the design team for a little bit, big imposter syndrome there. I'm not a designer. I've never been a product designer. I could do more of the PM product work, sure, but I just got design because it was like close to product. But I just didn't have that. Well, what would I say? How would I guide this design team in terms of strategy? Well, the things they needed to be thinking about. When I led the analytics team, and analytics and design are kind of similar, right? They are adjunct functions that support the R&D process, but just on different ends of the spectrum, maybe. I knew exactly what to share with the analytics team. I knew what tools they should be thinking about, how to level themselves up, ways that they could improve their velocity. So as a leader, I could be very functionally valuable for the team. Complete opposite on design. I had no idea. Literally just like maybe an agony aunt or just like someone to chat with. That felt weird. It felt uncomfortable. I didn't like that. At a certain point, I think if you're feeling that over and over and over and like it doesn't change, that could be signal that you just need to give that Lego up and move on, right? If you don't want to like buckle up and learn about performance marketing or whatever it is, again, it's that moment. Maybe there's someone else who's better at doing that than you are. And in my case, that was the case.
When you were feeling some of these feelings, did you say them out loud? Like, did you tell anyone that you were feeling any imposter syndrome?
That's an interesting question. No, not really. I should have.
What do you think it would have changed if you had? Or would it have changed anything?
I think it would have. I think we would have maybe more quickly gotten moving on hiring the right person in to lead the function, right? Like, and maybe that would have been velocity boosting for the company overall. I think maybe if someone's thinking about this right now and they feel that imposter syndrome, they don't enjoy the bit of work that they own, and they think that like it would be best to give it to someone else that might be better for the company, and in turn, hopefully better for their own stock options.
Yeah. How can someone detangle if it's imposter syndrome or if it's just like a growth opportunity and they're a little nervous about it? Because there's such a fine line here, right? Where it's like you're in over your head and your body is screaming at you, or, versus, hey, you're in a really cool opportunity and this is growth, and sometimes growth hurts a little bit, but plow through, good stuff is ahead.
Yeah, and it's like, is it imposter syndrome or a growth opportunity or a performance issue?
Right, yeah, or that too, totally.
Yeah, it could signal the end of the road for you in this context, yeah.
I think this is why it's so hard for folks, is because they don't know. And so anyways, I'm curious how you think about this.
You mentioned you work with a career coach. I think that's potentially one avenue that can be really helpful, right? Having someone who is an experienced human being who you can talk to that is outside of the context of your company, doesn't have a vested interest in any particular outcome, who you can kind of share your thoughts with unvarnished, can potentially reveal that actually this is not a growth opportunity. This is something that like you just don't want to do. And like you're just doing because you feel like you have to, or you're doing out of a feeling of fear that if you don't do it, you're going to be fired. But the reality is that maybe if you put your hand up and say, I don't want to do this, in fact, I want to do this other thing instead, that might earn you that massive amount of respect and kudos that actually you're not going to get fired. You're going to create your dream opportunity. You'll forge like a path for yourself because of course the company would rather have you, you do this new thing than some brand new individual, and that would be better. But it needs someone who's maybe detached from the situation to help you with that. And I think talking it through with that person. So that's maybe one avenue. If you're not working with a coach, right, and not everyone can afford to, is there that person in your life, whether in the work setting or not, who can play that role to an extent? And then failing, having someone else to kind of rubber duck it with, maybe there is a degree of self-examination and emotional interrogation to be like, all right, this is hard. This work I'm doing is hard. But is it hard because I'm just not good at it, but I really want to be good at it and I see myself getting better and I see a world in the future where I am top 1% at this thing? Or is it hard because when I really sit down and ask myself, do I like this? The answer is just no. And if the answer is just no, maybe you shouldn't be doing it.
Right. If it's hard and it's painful and it doesn't get you where you want to go and you're not good at it, time to make a change. So for you've had some amazing experiences, right? You've had a ton of different jobs. You've been at Superhuman for a long time. I know that you're out on your own now doing some advising. For you, what are the habits or rituals that you lean on to bring out your peak performance in whatever way you define it?
So as someone who's worked on productivity for literally a decade or more than a decade, I have lots and lots of habits and rituals that help in different situations. But I'll share a couple nuggets.
Maybe just share a few of your favorites that might be applicable for this audience. As
I was thinking about this, I think there's maybe two categories. I can talk about ways to enhance your output when it's like execution time, where you're just like doing. And maybe there's ways to enhance your output when it's like conversational, like you're working with people. In the execution side of the world, this is so basic, but I think it's so valuable. Blocking your time, like looking at your calendar as your biggest asset and saying, I'm going to spend 90 minutes doing X, or I'm going to spend 30 minutes reviewing the Figma files, or 90 minutes producing the Q1 strategy, whatever it is. Just block the time and define what you're doing with that time so that you don't get to the end of it and be like, oh, I'll get to the end of the day, I didn't do the thing I was supposed to do. While I am in those blocks, something that I think about a lot as a video game nerd is this idea of actions per minute. If anyone plays video games at a high level, they know what their actions per minute is. It's a StarCraft KPI, other kind of big video games that are played competitively. All those gamers know how many keystrokes they are putting into the system per minute. Kind of like your words per minute when you speak or you're typing words per minute, that kind of thing. So your actions per minute really counts, I think, in terms of how quickly can you get stuff done. And so then that breaks down into your tool stack, like the software you use, how good is the hardware and laptop that you happen to be using. So I encourage folks to think about their actions per minute and can they sort of just increase that? Because if you can increase it by 5 or 10%, it probably will increase your output by 5 or 10%. Another tip is something I learned from Tiago Forte, who runs Forte Labs. It's like a productivity focused, I want to say, brand. I love this idea that he's written about, where if you only have 30 or 40 minutes, but the project is like many hours, many days worth, what you can do with that 30, 40 minutes is still very special. You can create a module of work. You can assemble a sub-module of output, and you can do that in lots of 30, 40-minute segments. And then later on, stack those modules of work together. So you think about it like building Lego. you build small chunks of Lego and then you kind of clip them onto each other at the end, and then you got your final product. This is such a powerful way of thinking about things, because if you're stuck between meetings and you only have little 30, 40-minute slices of time, I find that mental model is really relieving and freeing to know that you don't have to get to the end of the project in 30 minutes. What you need to do is just get to like a useful, defined kind of end chunk that you can then look back on and be like, cool, I did it. And then you can do that again the next time you have a chunk of time. Those are a couple of things on the execution side. One of the like working with people side, just two really basic things that I like to bring. I like to stand up for any conversation that matters. I'm standing up right now.
I was going to say, and you're standing up now.
This helps you think better. And I like to bring humor and levity. I think that's so important. So those would be my hot tips for people in these scenarios.
And how about on the flip side? For you, if you're having a tough day in whatever way that manifests for you, how do you reset?
A couple of just like easy go-tos for me. One is take a nap. Go outside, get some fresh air, some sunlight, touch grass, spend some time with my kid, right? Like I sometimes find that just like taking myself out of the situation and resetting with family is really powerful. And I think for different people, maybe that's their significant other or their dog or whatever it might be. But just taking yourself out of the scenario and getting a little bit of that perspective. But I think it is valuable for everyone to know how our bodies work biologically. And I think going outside, seeing sunlight, getting fresh air, these have real biochemical changes, or they trigger real biochemical changes in the body that like improve your day, improve how you feel. There are hormonal changes that make you like feel better when you do that. So easy hack for somebody who's feeling bad, like just go outside.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I was even, as you were sharing that, I was even thinking about my own life. I've got a 4-month-old. You can't have a bad day when you're holding a little baby like that and they're smiling at you and maybe you get your first couple laughs from them. It's like impossible. It's just like chemically we're engineered to love that. And so that's great advice. If you could go back in time, what's one soft skill that you wished you worked on earlier in your career that would have been helpful? You talked a little bit earlier, obviously, about some of the feedback that you got as in the management consultant world and being a little softer with some of your opinions and the way that you shared some of your ideas and things. But I'm curious if anything else comes to mind.
Yeah, I think putting that one aside, like another one that comes up is really compelling storytelling. I think in a consulting career, in that sort of vein of profession where it's all about facts and it's all about being right, you know, you index very highly on the content. And yeah, there's storytelling and so on in consulting, of course, but like a large part of what we sold was like the content. The content is really good here, but so much, almost like 80% of what actually comes, I have found in business, in startups and tech, it's all about the storytelling. It's all about how you say it and the packaging. And then the content is, yeah, like truly it's around 20% of what matters. Or, you know, maybe framing it another way, you have to have good storytelling to get someone's attention. Then the content also has to be good, but it's sequential. If you don't have their attention, you're toast. So I think practicing storytelling early on and figuring out how to tell a compelling story, an interesting story. And the funny thing is, learning that skill is so challenging. Like there aren't great opportunities in most people's careers to do that.
I was just going to ask if you had any tips for somebody looking to take one step in that direction. Yeah, it's hard.
I think something that's like very tangible is you could maybe do things like take an improv class or like spend time outside of a professional setting working on how you land messages, right? Like, so improv class is one example. And I actually know a software engineer, he was one of the founding engineers at Superhuman, who went and did just that. He went and took improv classes. And I saw over the course of a couple of years, he went from not very good at expressing his ideas to like, when he talks, people listened. It was amazing. It's like, wow, the improv classes really worked. Of course, you can practice in a professional setting, but if you're not getting those opportunities, then it might make sense to give yourself the opportunity.
That's such a cool suggestion. I worked at HubSpot for a long time. Mike Volpe was the VP of marketing, incredibly charismatic, great in front of the room, a strong leader. When he stepped down, they promoted Kip Bodnar, who is the CMO to this day. And Kip, great guy, but not known to be like Mike. And I remember reading a blog article that he wrote that he was taking improv classes specifically to improve his presentation and storytelling and the way that he could command a room and to try to lower his public speaking anxiety. And I wrote down as like a professional goal of mine to take an improv class, and I didn't. I never did. I did one Toastmasters, which I was like, oh, this is not for me.
There's still time, man.
That's true.
There's still time.
That's true. Yeah. Well, dude, you shared a ton about your journey. Anything that we haven't talked about that you want folks to take away from your story and some of your lessons here?
No, I mean, I think, general feel-good sort of vibe, just enjoy it, right? Like, everyone should seek to enjoy what they're doing. Don't take things too seriously and have fun.
I think that's the best advice. I love that you said that earlier, where you said, like, to stand up. And I also just like to bring a little humor and levity. Work is serious enough. That's fine. We can have a good time still. And I think that's great advice for everybody. Dude, thank you for coming on, sharing your journey. For folks who are listening that want to connect with you, where should they go? How can they learn more?
Yeah, totally. Well, thanks for having me on, first of all. This was super fun. If folks would like to connect, I'm on LinkedIn. You can search my name, Gaurav Vohra. I'm also on Twitter. You'll find me dropping the occasional stray thought over there. You can also go to my website, gauravvohra.com. That mostly focuses around my advising. So if you are interested in maybe striking up a conversation about the advising work that I do, you can see a little bit more about that on my website. Or you can just message me on one of the social networks. But yeah, really appreciate, again, you having me on the pod.
Hell yeah, man. Thank you for coming on.